Wealthy mother-in-law humiliates humble daughter-in-law, but upon discovering her real background, she's left utterly speechless. Ilara stood at the entrance of the grand Hawthorne estate, her heart pounding in her chest. The walls, adorned with opulence, felt like they were closing in on her. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of anxiety swirling inside. Tonight was the family dinner, and she knew that Vivian, the matriarch of the family, would be watching her every move. Would her hands shake too much? Would her voice waver? Ilara pushed those thoughts away as she stepped inside. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken judgments. As family members arrived, their whispers filled the air like an invisible fog. "Look at her dress," one cousin murmured. "Does she even belong here?" another scoffed. Ilara felt the weight of their eyes on her, the silent expectations pressing down like a heavy cloak. She straightened her back, reminding herself that she was here for a reason, even if that reason felt small against the backdrop of their wealth. Vivian entered the room, her presence commanding instant attention. With a sharp gaze, she zeroed in on Ilara. "Ah, Ilara, still pursuing your modest career?" Vivian's tone dripped with sarcasm. Ilara's stomach knotted. The disdain in Vivian's voice was unmistakable. "I just thought you might have higher ambitions, considering you are in such esteemed company." Ilara felt the heat rising to her cheeks, an overwhelming sense of powerlessness washing over her. But deep inside, she clung to a flicker of strength. She had a story to tell, one that could shift the narrative of this evening, and perhaps even the way Vivienne saw her. The question lingered. Would she find the courage to share it? The dinner table was a long, polished expanse, filled with gourmet dishes that sparkled under the chandelier's glow. As the meal began, laughter and chatter echoed around her, yet Ilara felt isolated in her thoughts. Memories of her childhood surfaced unbidden, the late nights spent studying while her mother sewed in the dim light, the sacrifices they made for her education. Each stitch in the fabric her mother crafted was a lesson in resilience. Suddenly, Vivian's voice cut through the haze. "Ilara, dear, why don't you tell us about your latest project? I'm curious how someone with your background interprets ambition." There was a challenge in her tone, a clear invitation for Ilara to fail. Taking a deep breath, Ilara decided to respond. "I've been working on a community project that focuses on local artisans. It's important to support those who..." But her words were drowned out by the condescending laughter from Vivian and the guests. "Local artisans? How quaint," Vivian said, her eyes glinting with mockery. The laughter echoed in Ilara's ears, sharp and painful. In that moment, Ilara's heart sank. It felt as if her truth was being dismissed, tossed aside like an unwanted gift, but a flicker of determination ignited within her. This was her moment. She spoke louder, her voice steadying. "You may find it quaint, but these artisans have stories worth sharing. They deserve recognition just as much as anyone else." The table fell silent. The shift in tone caught some family members off guard, their expressions a mix of surprise and discomfort. Vivian's piercing gaze narrowed. "And what stories do you have to share, Ilara? You come from humble beginnings, hardly the stuff of legends." The challenge hung in the air, heavy and charged. Ilara felt small under Vivian's scrutiny, but she refused to back down. "My mother worked late into the night to provide for me. She taught me the value of hard work and perseverance." As she spoke, the room buzzed with an uncomfortable tension. Ilara could sense the divide among the family members. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, torn between their loyalty to Vivian and a newfound respect for Ilara's courage. Vivian's expression hardened, but Ilara's heart raced, fueled by a growing resolve. She was ready to stand her ground, to share her truth. The night had just begun, but the weight of expectations was shifting, and Ilara felt it. Would she be able to change the course of the evening? The answer was uncertain, but she was determined to try. As Ilara sat at the long dining table in the Hawthorne estate, her mind raced with memories of her childhood. The lavish decorations around her felt like a stark contrast to the humble home she had known. She could almost hear her mother's gentle voice, urging her to study hard and follow her dreams. The pressure of the evening wrapped around her like a heavy cloak, and the whispers of her relatives only added to her anxiety. "Look at Alara," a distant cousin said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Is she still doing that little job at the bookstore?" Alara clenched her fists under the table, trying to block out the noise. She remembered the sacrifices her family made for her education. Her mother, with her weary hands, had sewn late into the night, making clothes for Alara and teaching her the value of hard work. Those memories flooded back, reminding her of the resilience that lived within her. Suddenly, she found herself lost in a flashback. She could see her mother sitting by the dim light of a lamp, fabric spread out around her. "Alara, always remember," her mother said, looking up with tired but loving eyes. "Hard work and determination will take you far. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." Alara felt a surge of warmth at the memory, but it quickly faded as she returned to the present. The laughter around her felt sharp, cutting through her thoughts. Vivienne, her aunt, sat across the table, watching her with those piercing eyes. It was as if Vivienne could see right through her, dissecting her every thought and feeling. "Alara, dear," Vivienne said, her voice smooth but laced with condescension. "What are your plans for the future? I hear the bookstore is quite quaint." The laughter that followed stung Alara deeply. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the room pressing down on her. "I'm happy at the bookstore," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "I enjoy helping people find the books they love." Vivienne scoffed. "Helping people find books? How very noble. But surely someone with your education could aspire to more than that." The laughter grew louder, echoing around the table. Alara felt her cheeks burn. "My education is important to me," she said, her voice gaining strength. "And the work I do matters." "Matters?" Vivienne repeated, her tone dripping with disbelief. "What does it matter when you could be out there making something of yourself? You come from such humble beginnings. Why not strive for something greater?" The condescending laughter from the guests pierced Alara's heart, but she refused to back down. "My background shaped who I am. I have a story to share, and it's worth more than your laughter," she said, her voice rising. Vivienne's laughter faltered, and the room went silent. For a moment, Alara felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps her voice mattered. Perhaps her truth could not be silenced. Just then, she remembered her mother's words once more, as if they were echoing in the air around her. "Stand tall, Alara. Your journey is your own." Alara took a deep breath, her heart pounding. "I grew up watching my mother work hard to provide for our family. She taught me resilience, and I carry that with me every day." Vivienne's expression shifted, but the guests remained silent, captivated by Alara's words. "I may not come from wealth, but I have value," Alara continued, feeling the determination swell within her. "I have dreams, and I will not let anyone belittle them." The room was thick with tension, and Alara looked around, searching for a sign of support. But the faces of her relatives revealed a mix of confusion and discomfort. Vivienne opened her mouth to respond, but Alara held up her hand, feeling empowered. "I refuse to hide anymore," Alara declared, her voice steady. "I am proud of where I come from, and I will not let your laughter drown my truth." As she spoke, Alara felt lighter. The memories of her past, the struggles, and the sacrifices all led her to this moment. She was no longer just the girl from the bookstore. She was a woman with a story, and she was ready to share it. In that moment, something shifted within her. Alara realized that she had the power to shape her own narrative, no matter how the Hawthorns viewed her. And as she looked at Vivienne, she saw the cracks beginning to form in the facade of superiority. Alara was ready to unveil her past, and for the first time, she felt a spark of hope for what lay ahead. The mood in the Hawthorne estate shifted like a sudden gust of wind when Mr. Caldwell stepped into the grand dining room. His entrance was unexpected, and the air seemed to hum with the promise of revelation. Ilara felt a mix of curiosity and apprehension as he approached her, a knowing smile on his face. "Ilara," he said warmly, his voice cutting through the tense atmosphere, "I hope you don't mind me joining you tonight. I have some stories that might interest your family." Vivian, still reeling from her earlier confrontation with Ilara, narrowed her eyes at Mr. Caldwell. "And what stories could you possibly have that are relevant here?" she challenged, her tone sharp. Mr. Caldwell turned to Vivian, unfazed by her hostility. "Stories of Ilara's mother, of course. You see, she was once a prominent figure in the fashion industry, a talent that many admired." The room fell silent, and Ilara's heart raced. She had often spoken of her mother's struggles, but she had never shared the full extent of her past. As the whispers of disbelief began to ripple through the guests, she felt a mixture of pride and vulnerability. Vivian scoffed, her composure faltering for the first time. "Is that so? I find it hard to believe," she said, crossing her arms defensively. "Believe it, Vivian," Mr. Caldwell replied, his eyes fierce with conviction. "I met her at a charity event years ago. She had such passion and determination. She was a rising star, but life had other plans." Ilara felt a swell of emotions as Mr. Caldwell continued to paint a picture of her mother that she had long kept locked away. "Your mother was known for her incredible designs and her kindness. She helped many young designers find their footing in the industry." A flicker of realization crossed Vivian's face. The carefully constructed image she had of herself began to crack. "But that was in the past," she retorted, trying to regain control. "What does that have to do with Ilara?" "It has everything to do with her," Mr. Caldwell insisted, turning his attention back to Ilara. "You carry her legacy in your spirit. Your mother's strength lives on in you." Ilara's heart swelled with pride, and for the first time, she felt a sense of empowerment rising within her. "I may not have followed the same path as my mother," she said, her voice steady, "but I have my own story. I have worked hard, and I will not let anyone diminish that." Vivian looked taken aback, her usual poise slipping further. "So, you think you can just waltz in here and claim a place among us because of your mother's past?" She spat, her voice tinged with bitterness. "I am not hiding behind my mother's legacy," Ilara replied, her tone firm. "I am proud of where I come from. My experiences shaped who I am today, and I won't let anyone belittle that." The tension in the room was palpable as family members exchanged glances, torn between their loyalty to Vivian and a burgeoning respect for Ilara. The whispers grew louder, echoing the struggle of acceptance and understanding. Mr. Caldwell nodded in agreement. "Ilara's journey is her own, and it deserves recognition. It is time for the truth to be acknowledged, Vivian." Ilara felt the weight of their gazes, and she stood a little taller, embracing the power of her truth. "I may not fit your mold, Vivian, but I am more than my humble beginnings. I am here to stay." Vivian's expression flickered between anger and uncertainty. For the first time, she seemed at a loss for words. The facade of superiority she had built around herself began to crumble, revealing a glimpse of vulnerability. As Ilara met Vivian's gaze, she felt a mix of empathy and defiance. The room remained silent, the air thick with the implications of what had been said. Ilara realized that her lineage was not just a shadow over her, it was a foundation for her strength. In that moment, Ilara understood that she had the power to redirect the narrative of the night. She was no longer just the girl from humble beginnings. She was a woman with a story, one that demanded to be heard and respected. As the dinner progressed, tension hung in the air like a thick fog. Vivian's cool demeanor began to crack, revealing the unease beneath her polished surface. With her sharp gaze fixed on Ilara, Vivian stood to confront her, the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes betraying her usual confidence. "Do you really think you can just waltz in here and claim a place among us?" Vivian's voice was steady, but there was a hint of desperation woven within her words. "Your background is hardly impressive." Alara felt a surge of courage from the stories Mr. Caldwell had shared. She straightened her back and met Vivian's eyes. "My background is part of who I am, Vivian. My mother worked hard to give me a chance. I am proud of that." Vivian scoffed, her lips curling into a disdainful smile. "Proud? You should be embarrassed. What do you have to show for it? Nothing but dreams and empty stories." "Those empty stories are filled with resilience," Alara shot back, her voice gaining strength. "My mother taught me the value of hard work and sacrifice. Just because you don't understand that doesn't mean it's not real." The room fell silent, the other family members looking back and forth between the two women. Some exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of whose side to take. Alara sensed the shift in the atmosphere as whispers of sympathy began to ripple among the guests. "Do you think I don't know about struggle?" Vivian pressed, her tone sharp. "I have worked for everything I have. You think you can come in here and lecture me?" Alara took a deep breath, feeling her heart race. "It's not about lecturing, Vivian. It's about sharing the truth. You may have wealth, but I have a story that deserves to be heard." Vivian's expression hardened, but Alara could see the cracks forming. "You think your story matters?" she retorted, but there was a tremor in her voice. "You're just a charity case in this family." Alara's heart sank for a moment, but she pressed on. "I may not have your privileges, but I have something you can never take away from me, my dignity. My story is just as important as yours, and it speaks of strength and perseverance." The murmurs in the room grew louder, echoing Alara's words. Some family members nodded, their expressions shifting from indifference to reluctant respect. Vivienne looked around, her arrogance faltering under the weight of their gazes. "Enough!" Vivienne shouted suddenly, her voice echoing off the walls. "You don't know what it means to fight for what you have. You think you can come here and disrupt our family?" Alara stood firm, refusing to back down. "I might not have lived your life, but I know what it means to fight for my place. I won't let you belittle my achievements or my mother's legacy." The confrontation hung in the air, charged with emotion. Alara felt a newfound power coursing through her veins. She had started to transform her vulnerability into a fierce statement of self-worth. "I am not afraid of you, Vivian. I refuse to hide in your shadow any longer." Vivian's face turned crimson with anger, but the room echoed with a different kind of energy now. "You think this changes anything?" She spat, but there was a tremor in her voice, a hint of uncertainty. "I think it changes everything," Alara replied, her voice steady and unwavering. "I am here to stay, and I will not be silenced." As the tension reached its peak, family members exchanged looks of shock and admiration. Ilara's heart raced, but she felt a sense of liberation. She had stood up for herself, and in doing so, she had begun to carve out a space for her truth within the opulent walls of the Hawthorne estate. In that moment, something shifted. The air felt lighter, filled with the possibility of change. Alara had no idea what would come next, but she was ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. The dinner had taken a turn that no one had expected. As the tension in the air began to settle, Alara noticed that the guests were no longer just whispering about her. Instead, they were lost in their own thoughts, reflecting on their lives and the hidden struggles they faced. The lavish dining room, with its sparkling chandeliers and polished silverware, felt strangely intimate now, as if the walls themselves were listening. Vivian sat at the head of the table, her expression shifting from irritation to contemplation. She glanced around at her family, noting the frowns and furrowed brows. It was clear that the stories shared by Mr. Caldwell had struck a chord. "I never knew how much I didn't know," a distant cousin murmured, breaking the silence. "Sometimes, we are so caught up in our own lives that we forget everyone has a story." Alara caught Vivian's gaze. There was no disdain in her eyes now, only a flicker of doubt. "You think you know people," Vivian said quietly, almost to herself. "But do you really know them?" Her words hung heavily in the air. Alara took a deep breath, feeling a mix of vulnerability and strength. "We all have our battles," she said, her voice steady. "I've fought mine, and I know I'm not alone." The room fell silent again, the weight of her words resonating with more than just Vivienne. Nathaniel, who had been quietly observing, leaned in slightly, his eyes bright with encouragement. "You're right, Alara. Everyone here has faced something. We all have our scars." He glanced at the other guests, inviting them to join the conversation. "What about you, Aunt Clara? You've always been so strong. What's your story?" Aunt Clara, who had always been a pillar of the family, looked taken aback. She had spent years portraying a perfect life, but now her eyes softened. "I lost my husband years ago," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I thought showing strength meant hiding my pain. I realize now that sharing it could have helped me heal." Vivienne shifted in her seat, her lips pressed together. The room was no longer just about her and Alara, it was a shared space of vulnerability. Alara felt a small spark of hope. Perhaps this was the moment that could change everything. "Vivienne," Nathaniel said gently, "you've been so hard on Alara, but it's not just her. It's all of us. We've hidden behind our facades for too long." He turned to Alara, a warm smile spreading across his face. "You showed us today that it's okay to be real. It's okay to share our struggles." Vivienne's gaze softened as she looked at Alara. "I didn't mean for it to come off that way," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted the best for my family. Maybe I've lost sight of what that really means." Alara felt a swell of emotion. "We all want the best, Vivienne, but sometimes the best isn't about perfection. It's about understanding, love, and acceptance." As the dinner continued, the atmosphere shifted from one of judgment to empathy. Guests began to share their own stories, their voices mingling in a chorus of vulnerability. Each tale added to the tapestry of their lives, revealing the complexity behind each person at the table. In that moment, Alara realized how powerful honesty could be. She looked at Nathaniel, who gave her an encouraging nod. She felt a warmth spreading through her, a sense of belonging that she had longed for. As the evening wore on, the conversations deepened. Each family member reflected on their own actions and words, pondering how they had impacted one another. Vivienne, once the unyielding matriarch, now appeared small and human, caught in the web of her own realizations. Alara's heart raced with a mix of hope and fear. Could this be the beginning of a new chapter? The table, once a battleground of expectations, had transformed into a sanctuary of connection. As the clock ticked steadily, a poignant silence fell over the group. Each person was lost in thought, contemplating the weight of their choices and the truths that had been revealed. Alara felt a connection growing, fragile yet beautiful, as they all acknowledged their pasts and opened their hearts to the possibility of understanding. As the tension in the Hawthorne estate began to settle, Alara found herself standing in the quiet garden behind the grand house. The moonlight spilled softly over the manicured lawns, casting gentle shadows around her. It was a stark contrast to the storm of emotions that swirled inside her. She took a deep breath, feeling both the weight of the evening and a newfound sense of courage. Vivienne soon joined her, her expression a mix of uncertainty and something softer, perhaps regret. "Alara," she started, her voice steadier than before. "Can we talk?" Alara turned to face her, her heart pounding. "What is there to say?" she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "You've made your feelings about me very clear." Vivienne sighed, the sharpness in her tone fading. "I know I've been hard on you. I thought I was guiding you, but maybe I was just trying to protect my image." "Protect your image?" Alara echoed, her brow furrowing. "Is that all you care about? What about the truth? What about my story?" Vivienne seemed taken aback, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her face. I didn't realize how much pressure I put on you. I thought success meant standing above others, not acknowledging our roots." Alara felt a shift, a crack in the armor Vivienne wore so carefully. "I've always felt like I had to prove myself, to show you I am worthy. But I am not just a reflection of your expectations. My journey has its own value. Then tell me about your journey, Vivian urged, her voice softer now. I want to understand. Alara hesitated for a moment, searching Vivian's face for any hint of insincerity. Finding none, she spoke. My mother worked so hard to give me a chance. She sacrificed everything. I learned resilience from her, not from the luxury you grew up with. It's not something I can just toss aside. Vivian nodded slowly, absorbing Alara's words. I see that now. I've let my own fears shape my actions, pushing you away when I should have been embracing your strength. I was afraid of being overshadowed. Alara felt a warmth in her chest at Vivian's admission. We are not in competition, Vivian. I want us to be stronger together, not apart. Together? Vivian repeated, a hint of disbelief in her voice. What would that even look like? Alara smiled gently. It means accepting each other for who we are. It means I can share my experiences without fear, and it means you can allow yourself to be vulnerable too. Vivian took a step closer, her eyes searching Alara's. I've been so focused on my own image that I forgot the importance of family. I want to change that. I want to support you, not tear you down. With those words, Alara felt a shift in the air around them. It was as if the weight of unspoken judgments had begun to lift. I want that too, Alara replied, her voice firm yet gentle. We can redefine our relationship. The two women stood in silence for a moment, each reflecting on the ground they had covered. Finally, Vivian spoke again. I've been wrong, Alara. I've let my insecurities cloud my judgment. Can you forgive me? Alara's heart swelled with a mixture of empathy and hope. I can forgive you, but it will take time for us to build something new. I need to see that you're committed to this change. I am, Vivian promised, her voice earnest. I will do better. I want to learn from you, to see the world through your eyes. Alara smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. Then let's start fresh. Let's create a space where we can both thrive. As they stood together under the moonlight, a new understanding began to blossom between them. The barriers that had once seemed insurmountable began to crumble, replaced by a fragile yet potent bond. In that moment, both women felt the transformative power of truth and acceptance, paving the way for a brighter future together. I believe in us, Vivian said softly, reaching out to take Alara's hand. Alara squeezed her hand back, feeling a sense of unity. So do I. Together, they turned back toward the house, ready to face the family once more, not as adversaries, but as allies, ready to embrace a new beginning. Share this story if you believe that understanding and acceptance can transform even the most challenging relationships. Leave a comment about a time when a heartfelt conversation changed your life, and subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one.